Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. We are from group 4 and in subject second language acquisition. So our today's discussion is about the role of formal instruction in second language acquisition. Before that, let me introduce myself and also my partners. My name is Tiffanie and my partners are Rian, Ahmadi, Niko, Perdana, Rahma Meiliyanti, Rian, Maradha, Putri, and Putri, Pratama, Lestari. Okay, we start from introduction. The role of formal assumption is that the order in which grammatical features are taught will govern the order in which they are learned. And then language syllabus are organized in such a way to facilitate the correlation between the teaching order and learning order. Next is the investigation of the role of formal instruction can be undertaken in two ways. First, an answer to the question, does formal instruction aid SLA, can be sought. Secondly, the question, what kinds of formal instruction facilitate SLA the most, can be tackled. In the first question, there is an assumption that all types of formal instruction share certain basic premises, and that it is therefore possible to talk generically of formal instruction. And then in the second question, there is an assumption that formal instruction in general is facilitative, and that the important issues is what distinguishes the more successful from the least successful types. Okay, next, the instructional goal. The instructional goal can be rule internalization or formal memorization, the latter posing a lighter learning burden than the former. But even more important is the learner's perspective, that is intended as an attempt to practice a grammatical rule by the teacher. It may be seen as a cognitive puzzle by the learner, requiring not language learning strategies but procedure for getting right answer. Okay, next slide is the criterial attributes of formal instruction. What then are the criterial attributes of formal instructions? These are specific grammatical features are selected for the learner's attention, and the second is this attention is manifest in a focus on the formal characteristic of the grammatical features. In terms of these two attributes, formal instruction is taken to include the instruction that results from deductive methods such as cognitive code, inductive methods such as autolinguism, and also instruction based on national functional materials where specific linguistic means for realizing various speech acts or semantico-grammatical categories are introduced and practiced. Well, it is not taken to include instruction where the learner is encouraged to engage in natural communication using whatever project. Okay, to summarize this, studying the role of formal instruction in SLA is important both for developing a theoretical understanding of SLA and for language pedagogy. In the case of the former, it can shed light on how differences in environmental conditions affect XLA. In the case of the latter, it can help to test basic pedagogic assumptions such as whether the order in which grammatical structures are presented correspond to the order in which they are learned. And then instruction can take many different form. But for the purposes of this chapter, the issue to be investigated is not which type of instruction is most effective, but whether formal instruction per se has any effect. To this end, instruction is taken to imply some form of consciousness rising targeted at specific linguistic features. Its effect may be evident on the root of SLA or the rate success of SLA. Okay guys, the next slide is the effects of formal instruction on the root of SLA. So SLA was considered in terms of a general sequence of development and the order in which specific grammatical features were acquired. The evidence for the reported universality of the sequence and the minor differences in the order came from first, morpheme studies, and the second is longitudinal studies. These studies, however, were of either pure naturalistic SLA or mixed SLA. Okay, now we talk about morpheme studies of classroom SLA. The morpheme studies can be divided into two groups. In the first group are 5 studies that investigated second language learners. In the other group are 4 studies that investigated foreign language learners. So 3 of the studies of second language learners found the same morpheme order in classroom SLA as in naturalistic SLA. According Fatman 1975, used an oral production task to assess the grammatical knowledge of 200 children aged from 6 to 15 years from diverse backgrounds. Some of the children were receiving language instruction while others were placed in normal classrooms. Fathman found a highly significant correlation between the morpheme orders of the two groups of learners and concluded that the order of acquisition remained constant, irrespective of instruction. Okay, next, the 2 other studies of second language learners suggest that instruction can have an effect on morpheme orders, although the effect is relatively minor and not long lasting. Investigated the performance of 175 French-speaking students of English on first, a grammatically judgment test, and second, a communication task involving picture description. They found that the scores on first improved as a result of the instruction but that the overall scores fell back later, and then on second they found that the order of the grammatical features that the order of various noun and verb morphemes was different from the natural order. This was because the students did worse and the plural than the progressive morpheme, possibly because of the effects of their first language, for example like France. And then however, when verb and noun morphemes were considered separately, the order conformed to those occurring naturally. In a later study found that a group of students to those in the first study had overlearned the progressive ing at one stage of their first study. Okay, one of the problems with all the 5 classroom morphemes studies of second language learner is that the learners were receiving instruction in an environment where it was possible for them to have exposure to the second language outside the classroom. In the other words, the studies may not have tapped the effects of pure classroom learning. Nevertheless, Fatman reports a positive correlation in the orders produced by the 2 groups of learners, although she does identify a number of minor differences. The second study of pure classroom learning that PICA reviews is that by Mikano 1979. Makino investigated 9 morphemes produced in a writing task by 777 subjects learning English as a foreign language in Japanese secondary school. The results showed that the resulting morpheme order correlated significantly with the order reported by Dulay and Burt and by other morpheme researchers. The third study that Pika looks at is Sejaffera 1981. He collected some spontaneous speech from Finnish learners of English as a foreign language and found a disturbed order. One of the major differences was in the rank position of the article. Pika notes that both Finnish and Japanese article systems are different from English, but that only the Finnish learners in Jafara's study diverge from the natural order. Pika carried out her own study of the effect of instruction on the morpheme order. She compared 6 learners of English as a foreign language receiving formal instruction in Mexico with both a group of naturalistic learners and a mixed group. The 9 morpheme studies referred to are summarized. So the conclusion that can be drawn in general, formal instruction doesn't appear to have any marked effect on the morpheme order reported for naturalistic or mixed SLA. Only when the data used to compute the morpheme order are heavily monitored do the differences emerge. Formal instruction appears then to have only a negligible effect on the morpheme order manifest in spontaneous language use. However, as pointed out in Chapter 3, morpheme orders measure accuracy rather than acquisition in order to obtain a more reliable picture of the effects of instruction on second language development. It is necessary to turn to the longitudinal studies of transitional structures. Okay, the next slide is longitudinal studies of classroom SLA. Alright, 1980 observe curiously the case study approach so central to the methodology baggage of first and second language acquisition researchers hasn't typically been thought sensible for the learners in class. Okay, the next explanation will be explained by my partner.
Okay, thank you, Tiffanie. Next material about the effects of formal instruction on the rate or success of SLA. Studies of the effects of formal instruction on the rate or success of SLA have been more plentiful. However, all of these studies examine the relative utility of instruction. That is, they were concerned with the overall effects of instruction on L2 proficiency in relation to the effects of simple exposure to the L2 in natural settings. Thus, none of the studies examine the absolute effects of formal instruction, that is, whether instruction could speed up the acquisition of specific grammatical structures. Also, as the studies examine mixed L2 learners, example, those who receive both exposure and instruction, the studies were not able to say whether formal instruction for C was more effective than exposure for C, but only whether instruction plus exposure was better than exposure by itself, or whether more instruction plus exposure was better than less instruction and exposure. This is not entirely satisfactory on a number of grounds, uh, which, which will be considered later. Okay, the next, the relative utility of formal instruction. Studies of this type can be further divided as follows. The first, those studies that show a positive effects of instruction. The second, those studies that are ambiguous. And the third, those studies that show the effect of instruction. Long discusses six studies that show a positive effect of formal instruction. Uh, Two of these compare the effects of different amounts of instruction on students who have received the same amount of exposure. For others, and investigate the relationship between different amounts of instruction and exposure and the students' proficiency levels. Altogether, the studies cover children and adults, a range of proficiency levels, and different target language. Also, the tests used to measure proficiency levels were both of the discrete point, example, multiple choice, and integrative example clause types. But studies found that those students with more instruction score higher on proficiency tests than those with less. However, as Long points out, it is not possible to be sure that it is instruction first that is having the effects, presumably the students with more instruction experience more overall contact with the L2. Thus, the result obtained could be explained in terms of the amount of total contact, example total instruction time plus total exposure time. All four studies found a positive relationship between instruction and proficiency, but only three found a similar relationship between exposure and proficiency. Also, the strength of the relationship with instruction was stronger in two of the studies and weaker in only one. Okay, next, the absolute effects of formal instruction. The kinds of studies report above do not shed any light on what actually happens when formal instruction takes place. Thus, active involvement in formal language instruction did not appear to facilitate SLA. This study cannot claim to show that formal instruction has no absolute effect. Many more confirmatory studies would be required to reach such a conclusion, but it does indicate that the relative utility of instruction may not result from the acquisition of the structures that constitute the pedagogic target of lessons. This point is taken up later. Okay, thank you. Next material will be explained my partner.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Rahma Meiliyanti. Okay, today I will continue my friend explanation. In the short term, therefore, long review of the research only confirm a common sense assumption. What is the of interest? How is not so much whether formal instruction facilitates the rate or success of SLA, but how, on this score, the studies are not helpful. As a result, it is necessary to try to seek a theoretical rather than empirical answer. And then next is explaining the rules of instruction. A review of empirical research into an effect of a formal instruction on SLA has indicated that although instruction has no apparent effect on the sequence of development and very little on the order of development, it does have relative utility where the rate or success of SLA is concerned. These are: the first is the non-interface position, the second is the interface position, and then the last is the variability position. The non-interface position has been advanced most strongly by Carson in 1982. Carson, it will be recalled, identified two types of linguistic knowledge in SLA. Acquisition occurs automatically when the learner engages in natural communication where the focus is on meaning and where there is comprehensible input. Learning occur as a result of formal study where the learner is focused on the formal properties of the L2. And then next is, this is the non-interface position. Carson advised a number of reasons for the separateness of accurate and learned knowledge. The first is there are plenty of cases of acquisition where no learning has occurred. These are widely reported in studies of naturalistic SLA. The second is there are cases where learning has taken place but where it has failed to become acquisition. Carson referred to the case of P. Carson and Pond in 1975, who had learned rules like the third-person singular as, but was unable to use them in casual conversation because she had not yet acquired them. And then the last is, even the best learners can master only a small subset of the grammatical rules of the L2. This is because most of the rules are far too difficult for the average learner to follow. Carson points out that it often takes a linguist years to describe successful rules that are easily accurate. And then next is the interface position. The interface position states that also the learner possesses different kind of L2 knowledge. They are not entirely separate, with the result that seepage from one knowledge type to the other occur. It is possible to distinguish a weak and a strong interface position. A weak interface position has been proposed by Seliger in 1979. Seliger argued that the consecutive rules with learner then learn as a result of formal instruction are anomalous in that different learners end up with different representation of the rules they have been taught. Okay, next material will be explained by Putri Pratama Lestari.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Putri Pratama Lestari. I will explain about the interface position. So, the interface position states that although the learner possesses different kind of L2 knowledge, these are not entirely separate, with the result that seepage from one knowledge type to the other occur. It is possible to distinguish a weak and strong interface position. A weak interface position has been proposed by Seliger 1979. Seliger argues that the conscious rules which learners learn as a result of formal instruction are anomalous, in that different learners end up with different representation of the rules they have been taught. Next, in contrast, Stefik 1980 develops a model of ASLE which he calls the Levertov machine, which does allow for a flow of knowledge from learning to acquisition, and vice versa. He suggests that learning may relate to secondary memory, which is capable of holding material for longer than 2 minutes, but from which material is gradually lost. The rule of formal instruction 235, unless it is occasionally used, and contain material that is never lost even if it is not used. According to Bialystock, see Bialystock and Froelich 1977, Bialystock 1979, and 1981, there are two types of knowledge which can interact: implic and explic, but it is clear from here description of them that they correspond fairly closely to crashes, acquired, or learned types. Bialystock suggests that practices serves as the mechanism by which explicit knowledge turns into implicit knowledge. Thus, implicit knowledge can be built up in two different ways. First, the primary means is unconscious acquisition, and second, the secondary means is through the automatizing of explicit knowledge by practices. One way then in which acquired and learned may be connected is in terms of automaticity. This is a view developed by McLaughlin 1978 in his attack on crescent non-interface position. McLaughlin referred to Schneider and Sherwin's 1977 distinction between controlled and automatic processing. Control processing requires active attention so that only a limited number of features can be controlled at a time without interface occurring. Automatic processing takes place without active control or attention. The important points in the automatic process are learned following the earlier use of control process. Classroom learners have the advantage that they can augment their implicit or acquired knowledge in two ways. First, directly by means of the intake environment supplied by the classroom, and indirectly by automatizing explicit knowledge through practice. Next, the variability position. The variability position to receptuality briefly. The learner's interlanguage comprise both non-systematic and systematic variability. Systematic variability is the produce of both the linguistic and situation contexts. How does a variability position such as that described by Bialystock 1982 or Tarno 1983 account for the result of the empirical studies into the effect of formal instruction? Because the natural sequence of development is a reflection of one particular type of language, uses spontaneous communication, it will never change. The variability position can also explain why classroom learners outperform naturalistic learners on discrete point tests. Enough for me, and next material will be explained by Rian Ahmadi.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Rian Ahmadi Niko Perdana and I am from group 4. Then I will continue the presentation. Okay, I will explain about the summary. This section has examined three theoretical positions which provide explanation of why formal instruction does not affect the natural sequence of SLA, but does facilitate more rapid development. The non-interface position proposed by Crescent claims that acquisition and learning are separate. Because acquisition is responsible for the natural sequence, the learning that results from formal instruction cannot influence it. However, classroom that provides opportunities for comprehensible input will accelerate acquisition. The interface position also posits two types of L2 knowledge, but argues that they are related so that learning can become acquisition. When it is sufficiently practiced, a weaker version of this position, however, states that learning does not so much turn into acquisition as facilitate it when the learner is ready. Then, conclusion. This chapter begins by asserting that the investigation of the role played by instruction in SLA was of significance for both SLA theory and language pedagogy. In this conclusion, I shall briefly consider some of the implications. And the next is SLA theory. Studying the role of instruction can throw light on the contribution of environmental factor in SLA. First, it might be taken to show that the real determinants of SLA are learner internal rather than environmental factors. What is quite clear, whatever interpretation is adopted, is that SLA possesses certain structural properties which are immune to environmental difference inherent in classroom and natural setting. The effect of environmental factor appears to be restricted large to how quickly and how much of the L2 the learner acquires. Then next is language pedagogy. Looking at instruction from the viewpoint of the learner rather than the teacher is salutary. It puts into perspective the widely held view that if instruction is based on a sound syllabus and employs motivation techniques, acquisition will result. It must be said at the outset that is not or at all certain that at the present time there are any clear implication for language teaching to be drawn from the study of second language learning. In devising a teaching program, it is clearly desirable to take into consideration how learners learn, but it is also necessary to take into account non-learner factor. The role of formal instruction 243, teacher ought not to feel obligated to ensure that his teaching also follow it, as it is far more important that the teacher works from a syllabus which he finds logically acceptable. Brumfield argues that language teaching will be most successful when it follows a well-worked out plan which direct and organized what the teacher does. This has been evident in the different positions which have been adopted to explain the result of research into the effect of formal instruction. However, while it is wise to be tentative in seeking implication for language pedagogy from SLA research, it would be foolish to ignore this search totally. And the next is attitude to the code communication. Dilemma is held by protagonists of each of the three positions. First is the non-interface position. Crescent pay close attention to the role of grammar teaching in classroom SLA. The second use of grammar teaching is to satisfy learners' curiosity about the nature of the L2 grammatical system, grammar appreciation, and crescent college. And those who do only monitor some of the time and use the monitor for only a subpart of the grammar, the effect of self-correction and accuracy is modest. Second language performer can typically self-correct only a small percentage of their errors, even when deliberately focused on form and even when we only consider the easiest aspect of grammar. Crescent therefore believes that the role of teaching is to afford opportunities for communication rather than to draw attention to the L2 code. And the second is the interface position. Whereas the non-interface position emphasized to important and communication and minimize the importance of the code, the interface position assert to contribution of the code, that is the adult learner who has his attention drawn to features of the code can practice this both in and out of the classroom until he can use them subconsciously influence communication speech. He distinguishes two basis dimensions, elaborateness and explicitness. Consequentness raising therefore does not require that the learner is able to verbalize the rules he has learned. And the third is the variability position. The variability position stressed the importance of matching the learning process with the type of instruction. The goals refers to the type of language use that the learner need to engage in. If the goals is to participate in natural conversation, the learner will need to develop his vernacular style by acquiring 12 knowledge that is automatically but analyzed. This can be achieved directly by means of instruction that emphasize communication in the classroom. And the next is summary. The last summary. The roads is concerned, formal instruction appear to have no major effects. Where the rates or success is concerned, instruction is facilitative, although only in terms of relative utility, not in terms of absolute effects. Their different positions have been advanced to explain classroom SLA. The non-interface position associated with crescent distinguished acquired and learned knowledge and argues that they are spread. The explanation it gives for why formal instruction aids the rates or success of SLA is less clear. However, the interface position associated with Stefik and Sherwood Smith, among others, claim that learned or explicit knowledge can turn to acquired or implicit knowledge if there is enough practice. The variability position associated with Theron and Bialystok says acquisition and language use closely linked, such that different types of knowledge arise from and are required for the performance of different language tasks. The study of the role of instruction in SLA implication for both where language pedagogy is concerned instead like on the code communication dilemma, although once again it would be premature to come to any firm conclusion about the effectiveness of formal grammar teaching. Okay, I think that's all. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.